C60 olive oil is a popular choice for people wanting to activate their full potential. Improved sleep, faster recovery and more energy are just a few of the amazing comments received from our customers who take a spoonful a day. Make C60 oil a part of your daily routine and see what it can do for you. Activate your potential today at thec60company.com.
Hello and welcome to this David Icke Connector videocast. Well, I was a mainstream journalist for 20 years nigh on, and so I know it works. You have tramlines within which the media organisation allows you to report. And if you go beyond those tramlines, beyond those limitations, one of two things happens. Either it won't get in the paper or it won't get on air, or at worst, you won't be working for that organisation for very long. And this limitation of what can and cannot be reported and how it can be reported is within the very fabric of the mainstream media. And it brings about the most insidious, the most destructive form of censorship, which is self-censorship. These tramlines, what I call the postage stamp consensus, is basically a set of acceptable norms which you have to report the world from. And if you don't, then there are consequences. And so what happens is, instead of journalists putting forward stories and information that are outside of that limitation and having some kind of debate within the organization, why is this not going in the newspaper? Explain. Why is this not going to air? Explain. None of that goes on like it used to, because of self-censorship, where journalists looking for a quiet life, and there are honourable exceptions, by the way. There are still some outstanding journalists in the mainstream. It's just that they're getting fewer, and they're not the norm, or nearly so. But instead of having that debate and arguing your corner, because most of them want a quiet life and a check at the end of the month, they simply report both within this postage stamp, within these tramlines, and in the way that their media organisation wants it to be reported. And thus, we don't have journalism, as I say, except with honourable exceptions. We have people who are writing to a blueprint which is acceptable to their employers, and they call it news. You've only got to look at, well, I almost call them news organisations. Would not have been the right term, to say the least. But you look at CNN, MSNBC, and others in America, for instance, and the bias, the point that they're coming from and reporting everything is so utterly blatant. And it's because of this, not just with CNN and MSNBC, but across the media, that ratings and sales are plummeting, because people are absolutely sick of what is increasingly blatant lying to them. And not just lying, but suppressing information that it's the journalist's job to reveal. And we are seeing more and more examples of this coming to light as these tram lines, this postage stamp, gets squeezed and squeezed so that less and less can be reported, and reported in dispassionate, open ways without a spin and an agenda attached to it. So this week we've had a leaked tape leaked to the organization Project Veritas in America, which is of a ABC anchor lady, news presenter, talking to colleagues on what is termed a hot mic. The mic was on, she didn't obviously realize it was, and it was recorded, and this tape has now been circulated by Project Veritas. And in it, she describes how she had the Jeffrey Epstein story 3 years ago. As she said, we had the lot. Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, 3 years ago. But the ABC management killed the story, wouldn't run it. And then, of course, what came out was what she says she had 3 years ago. So a known paedophile was being protected by a major news organization, ABC. And she says in this tape that one of the reasons that the management blocked the story was after threats from the British royal family under the usual pseudonym of Buckingham Palace. Now, this is a fantastic story that a mega paedophile connected to the rich and famous, a great list of them, was known about by an ABC reporter, and she came out of it really well, this tape, because obviously she was, as she said, pissed at what happened to the story. Proper journalist. But even now, the release of this tape is a big story, exposing how a major media organization covered up for Jeffrey Epstein. But certainly at the time of recording this videocast, organizations like CNN and MSNBC not even covered the story. And then we have NBC, who were recently exposed for covering up for Harvey Weinstein, where their reporter had all the background on him that came out later, but NBC killed the story to protect Harvey Weinstein. And the reporter got the information out through another source, and of course, the rest is history, as they say. So we have this situation now, which has gone on and become so extreme now for so long that you can't believe anything the mainstream media tells you unless you check out the information yourself to see if they're lying to you, and much of the time they will be. This is a story just from this week. The New York Times claims to be a newspaper. It is a propaganda organ in every sense of the word. More New York Times reinvented history, falsely claiming Iraq protests express anti-Iran anger. The self-styled newspaper of record, in its own mind, finds new ways to shame itself. On Tuesday, the Times falsely claimed ongoing protests in Iraq over Iranian heavy-handed interventions in regional affairs that don't exist. In fact, the protests are not about Iran at all. They are about legitimate grievances, the story says, notably rampant corruption, high unemployment, impoverishment affecting millions, the nation's youth notably harmed, and lack of essential public services. But you see, there is a all-party consensus to demonize Iran. So the organs of the system, like the New York Times, simply spew out the propaganda to support that line, because it's all about controlling the perception of the public, and perception comes from information received. Control that to a very large extent, you're going to control perception, unless you're dealing with people, and they are now appearing in ever greater numbers, who have the self-awareness to realize they're being lied to and to check it out first. So this is what we have with the Silicon Valley censorship. It's about keeping off the internet as much as they can. This is what you have with YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all the others. It's keeping off the internet information that would give people a different way of looking at situations, different from what the system, the cabal behind it all, want people to believe, to perceive, and therefore support or oppose, depending on what the subject is. So we have a media class, keep saying, with honourable exceptions, but overwhelmingly that's what the mainstream media is. It's a media class. And the media class connects into the political class. And so you have the political system being used as a vehicle for this cabal in the shadows to push the world in a particular direction, to more and more mass control and imposition, while at the same time the media class support the direction of the world, A, by reporting it in a positive way, and B, by censoring and not covering what would get people to see this in a totally different light. For instance, we've had a series of articles in recent weeks in the British Daily Mail, which has had the goal of demonizing people who are questioning vaccinations and not vaccinating their children, because they've actually had the self-awareness to do some research and see what the facts are, instead of just absorbing what the system tells them to believe about vaccines on behalf of the big pharma cartel. So control information, and to a very large extent you control perception, which means controlling human society. And this is a quote from Noam Chomsky, American academic, of course, very well known. And he's describing how this whole system works to give you the illusion of debate and exchange of information and ideas, when actually it's nothing of the kind. He says, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate. And the political system is exactly the same in that regard as the media system. And here you have again the interaction and interconnection between the political class and the media class. Because this is what happens, as Chomsky was indicating there. You have the tram lines again. You have the postage stamp consensus of normal. And your political parties all operate within that consensus. Don't matter if they're left or right or centre or any of this other nonsense they call themselves. They operate within the same tram lines. I'll give you a quick example of that. You can have a debate, and politicians and the media have debates on, say, how high interest rates should be on borrowing money, right? And they'll have a debate, interest rates, they're too high, interest rates, they're too low. But they never question why banks are allowed to create money out of fresh air called credit and lend it to governments and businesses and individuals and charge them interest on it. Interest on, quote, money they have conjured out of fresh air on a computer screen called credit. This is the whole foundation in so many ways of how this cabal, through the banking system, controls human society, because it controls choice. And what is choice? It is freedom. The more choice you have, the freer you are. The less choice you have, the less free you are. And to an overwhelming extent, who has the money and who doesn't dictates who has choice and who doesn't. Now that's worthy of debate, right? Worthy of a little chat. Not in the mainstream media, it's not. And not in the mainstream political arena, it's not. And it's a testament to that in this upcoming general election in Britain, none of the parties will be questioning why private banks are allowed to bring the very currency of a country into existence as a interest-bearing debt. Money comes into circulation at its very creation as a debt. Any wonder why there's so much debt in the world? How many lives have been crushed by it? It's a nonsense. No political party, no media organization will be questioning that. Because they never have. This is what Chomsky means, and I'm agreeing with here, that you have the illusion of a debate. Oh, he's a hard interviewer, isn't he? Oh, he took him apart, didn't he? Yeah, but within the tram lines and not outside of it. So, if you go with the narrative as a journalist, you probably have a very good career. You certainly have a check at the end of the month. Well, until AI takes over from you, which it's already beginning to do in some cases. But try to be a proper journalist, investigating simply for the motivation of uncovering the truth, and your career won't last very long if that truth you uncover is outside the tram lines. So here's a great example. This is a book I published in September, The Trigger. It's not just about 9/11, but it is the major theme of the book in which I not only demolish with a tidal wave of fact the official story of 9/11, but I also name people that were really responsible, that really pulled it off, and then covered it up. And it wasn't 19 Arab hijackers or Osama bin Laden. Now, at the very least, as a journalistic story, that is massively worth reporting. Here's a bloke who has put together this very considerable book, which factually demolishes 9/11 and names who was really behind it. Now, by any journalistic criteria, that is a story. Even if you want to attack it, it's still a story, especially as it's published on the anniversary of 9/11. 5,000 press releases were sent out about the book, both sides of the Atlantic, and not one mainstream organization, except just one guy in the North who is a proper journalist, even touched it or mentioned it. And even the usual suspects who have spent years trying to demonize me for uncovering the truth as a journalist didn't mention it either. When given the content, you would think that they would be absolutely outraged. Don't mention it. Don't give it any publicity at all, even to attack it. I've been on the talk radio station in Britain a few times. Not that often, but here and there over the years. Now, it wasn't for a long time, but now it's owned by Rupert Murdoch. And the last two interviews I did on talk radio that were posted on YouTube have already got a combined viewership of 3 million people. And you would think that if there is that interest in what someone has to say, that when they then come out with a book exposing 9/11 and who did it, you would think that from a media point of view, a journalistic point of view, and even an advertising point of view in the sense of the audience, you would want to talk about that book. Challenge it, do whatever you like, but you would talk about it. Especially when you're a station that has to fill 24 hours of airtime every day. Well, books were sent to a number of those programs on talk radio. Not one has had me on it. Just like the 5,000 other press releases. But talk radio actually had the book sent to a number of programs. So you have a book that's been massively well received by those who've read it because of the information in it. It's devastating. Rewrites the whole of recent history. But the mainstream media won't even tell you about it, even to attack it. Another interesting kind of media phenomenon is RT, the Russian station, which is part funded by the Russian government. And, books were sent to their news programs, and there was zilch response from there either, both in London and in Moscow. But RT is interesting because of its circumstances, its situation. Because it's coming from the Russian point of view, it reports the West in a way that the mainstream Western media ought to report it. That's why I watch a RT bulletin at least once a day, see what they're reporting, because their tramline in relation to the West is wider than the mainstream media in the West. So they're going to ask questions and talk to people who well, apart from me, in terms of their news programs anyway, that have a different view of what's happening in the world. So that's great, and it's a good contribution to journalism in that sense. But then you look at RT reporting of Russia and anything to do with Vladimir Putin, and suddenly the tram lines squeeze, and they don't report Russia, question the Russian government in the way that they question Western government, Western happenings. But it does give you this this example again of how the tram lines work. That suits us in different circumstances. And the whole thing is captured in the motto that RT have, which is question more. And in terms of the tram lines in relation to Western reporting, they do question more. But this is how the sequence goes, you see. The mainstream media say, in effect, question nothing. RT says, question more. People like me say, question everything, to see if they're telling you the truth. And once you question everything and find it wanting, you are outside the tram lines. You are off the postage stamp. And so you're either abused, ridiculed, or ignored. And when they ignore you, when you're saying something that wouldn't normally journalistically be ignored, you know you're really on to something in terms of the truth of what's going on in the world. Now, why is this important? It's important because from information comes perception, and from perception comes behavior. So control information, you control behavior. Not in everybody, but in vast numbers of people. That's the sequence, that's the game. And what's been happening as the decades have passed is that more and more control of what people see and hear is being concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. And so you have the absolute now domination of information that people receive via a handful of Silicon Valley media corporations. And of course, the mainstream other media is also in the hands of a tiny few corporations, actually all with the same agenda in the end. So in America, you have AT&T, Comcast, the Walt Disney Company, CBS Corporation, Viacom, Fox Corporation, dominating that mainstream media arena. And this is why, and it's hilarious when you see them on the internet, where you have so-called news programs, both national and local, regional, owned by the same people, where they're reading news items word for word in different parts of America, because it's coming from a central source. And you see, again, the media class and the political class in the form of presenters on organizations like CNN, which Project Veritas, again through a whistleblower and a secretly recorded tape, revealed that the head of CNN, Jeff Zucker, has a morning conference call with his alleged journalists, hacks, and tells them what the stories of the day are going to be and how they're going to be covered. This is how it works. And so you see this with news presenters using exactly the same mantra of the day as the politicians are using. It's obviously all come from a central source, both media and politics. And this becomes more and more relevant as the control of the media becomes more and more centralized. I mean, we're heading towards one ownership in the end, and we ain't that far away. Now, I'm going to give you an example. Bear with me. I'm going to take a minute or two to read this list, but want to get over to people who've not looked at this, the scale of media ownership in terms of one or two corporations. There's a corporation in Britain called Reach PLC, used to be called Trinity Mirror. And what I'm going to do is just read you the list of what Reach PLC owns in terms of the British media. Deep breath. It owns the Daily Mirror, the Sunday Mirror, Daily Express, Sunday Express, Daily Record, Sunday Mail, Western Mail, the Sunday People. They're national papers. And local and regional newspapers, it owns the following: Accrington Observer, Anfield and Walton Star, Barking and Dagenham Yellow Advertiser, Bexley Mercury, Birmingham Post, Birmingham Mail, Sunday Mercury, Bootle Times, Bracknell Standard, Brenton Wembley Leader, Bristol Post, Buckinghamshire Examiner, Buckinghamshire Advertiser, Chester Chronicle, Chronicle Extra, that's in Newcastle, Colne Valley Chronicle, Coventry Telegraph, the Crawley News, Crewe Chronicle, Crosby Herald, Derby Evening Telegraph, Dover Express, Ealing Gazette, Ealing Informer, Ealing Leader. Lots of media choice in Ealing then. Ellesmere Port Pioneer, Enfield Advertiser, Enfield Gazette, Evening Chronicle, Newcastle again. Evening Gazette Teesside, Express and Echo, Formby Times, Fulham and Hammersmith Chronicle, the Glaswegian. Gloucester Citizen, Gloucestershire Echo, Haringey Advertiser, Harrow and Wembley Observer, Harrow Informer, Harrow Leader, Havering Yellow Advertiser, that's Romford, Haywood Advertiser, Highdown Books, Hinkley Times, Hounslow Borough Chronicle, Hounslow Chiswick and Witton Informer, Huddersfield District Chronicle, Huddersfield Examiner, Hull Daily Mail, Ilford and Redbridge Yellow Advertiser, Irish Daily Mirror, Irish Daily Star, 50% ownership of that, The Journal, Newcastle, Kensington and Chelsea Informer, Leicester Mercury, paper I used to work on, Lewisham and Greenwich Mercury, Liverpool Echo, Loughborough Echo, another paper I used to work on, Manchester Evening News, Manchester Metro News, Maggle Star, Middleton Guardian, Mid Devon Gazette, Milcham, Morden and Wimbledon Post, Neath Guardian, North East Manchester Advertiser, North Devon Journal, North Wales Daily Post, Nottingham Post, Oldham Advertiser, Ormskirk Advertiser, Paisley Daily Express, The Press, that's Barnet and Hendon, Presswich Advertiser, Reading Post, Rochdale Observer, Rosendale Free Press, Runcorn and Widnes Weekly News, Salford Advertiser, Slough Express, Stockport Express, Macclesfield Express, Winslow Express, The Sentinel in Staffordshire, Surrey Advertiser, Southport Visitor, South Manchester Reporter, South Liverpool Merseymart, South Wales Echo, South Wales Evening Post, Staines Informer, Streatham, Clapham and West Norwood Post, Sunday Sun, Newcastle. You have so much media diversity in Newcastle. Surrey Herald, Surrey Mirror Advertiser, Sutton and Epsom Post, Thames Side Advertiser, Glossop Advertiser, Uxbridge and Hillingdon Leader, Uxbridge Gazette, Walton and Weybridge Informer, The Wharf from Canary Wharf. Then in Scotland, Airdrie and Coatbridge Advertiser, Ayrshire Post, Blairgowrie Advertiser, Business 7, Dumfries and Galloway Standard, East Kilbride News, Galloway News, Hamilton Advertiser, Irving Herald, Kilmarnock Standard, Metro Scotland. See, my voice is going from the size of the frickin' list. This is one corporation. Where did I get? Metro Scotland, Paisley Daily Express, Perthshire Advertiser, Scottish Business Insider, Stirling Observer, Strathern Herald, the Lennox Herald, West Lothian Courier and Wishaw Press. And then digital online brands, Dublin Live, Examiner Live, that's in Huddersfield, Football London, Glasgow Live, Gloucestershire Live, and Leeds Live. That's one corporation, in the end, having the power to dictate to all those newspapers in terms of the lines they take. I was libeled by the usual suspects 2 or 3 years ago now. And the story, absolutely outrageous lie, was reported in a series of newspapers, word for bloody word. And so when I started looking at this, because obviously it was coming from a central source, I realized that company, then called Trinity Mirror, owned all the newspapers that were putting out the word for word libelous article about me. So what you have is a hierarchy of power, which in the end dictates what you see and hear, which starts with the owners, comes down through the editors, and the editors have to do what the owners do, or the editors don't have a job for very long. And then the editor dictates the line to the journalists, and the journalists have to keep in and on that line, the tram lines, if they want to keep their job. And this is how it works all over the world. Which comes to this. First of all, these journalists who are conforming to this and refusing to challenge it because they want an easy life, they are actually reporting their own demise, because the system wants all information transferred to the internet, where it can be algorithmically controlled without any human debate once the codes are in place. And it also wants much of journalism replaced by artificial intelligence. It's already happening. So these people are reporting their own demise while keeping their heads down and tugging their forelock. And yet, this is the point. This agenda of mass human global control, not least through the control of global information, means that they are targeted as well, and their children and their grandchildren. All the time that these journalists are ignoring information that absolutely people should know to realize what's going on and thus allow us see that something needs to be done about it, that's exposing how this network in the shadows is orchestrating all this. While they're doing that, journalists, or what they put on their tax form, journalists, they are creating the very environment which allows this cabal to go on its incessant and ever-quickening journey to mass human control, which means that their children, as well as them, but their children and their grandchildren, will have to live with that and in that for the rest of their lives. I'm 67. I don't need to do this. But I get up every morning before the sun to circulate information that is absolutely vital for people to know, so that what I've just described doesn't happen. That is simply journalism, as it should be, seeking to uncover the truth for the truth's sake and for the right of the public to know how they're being manipulated and to what end. But mainstream journalism is overwhelmingly, there are honourable exceptions, I keep saying that, there are, but it's overwhelmingly peopled by those who are quite happy to lie for the media class agenda, political class agenda, quite happy to censor, quite happy to demonize, quite happy to abuse and ridicule on behalf of the very force in the end that has them and their kids and grandkids in its gun sights. To say the least, it's rather pathetic. And I say to journalists of that mode, have a look in the mirror and see if any self-respect reflects back at you. All the best with that one.